Previously on Real Vision versus the Defiant, avenging angel Camila Russo got tough on the haters as she refused to rule out a return to full combat word jousting. And in the stunning finale, the bespectacled oracle of 80s pop, surfing pitch perfectly on the sweet chaos of future finance, Ash Bennington revealed he would, in his words, be watching the markets. And then there's me, back to the vanilla version of myself after last week's pathetic flirtation with metaverse metamorphosis. My only meaningful contribution to the conversation today, a well-grooved English accent and a promise to not split the infinitive. So Bitcoin was moving positively again this week. There's been some positive catalysts that we've seen. There was the India CBDC news. There's been a bunch of other things. Ash, has there been anything on your radar particularly to take note of that's been moving the market this way?
Well, this is just the traditional pattern. We're trading around 44,000 here as we record this show on Wednesday morning. The reality is this is the pattern of Bitcoin. We see these sell-offs, we see anxiety in the market based on price action, and then we see baseline recovery, and we're headed back in that direction again. There are a series of catalysts that we could talk about. You mentioned one, India, Russia. There are a couple of data points we could pick off, but reality check. This seems to be the way that the asset trades.
It is, but there also seems to be a growing groundswell of news and more kind of traditional players moving. We've got governments moving in various countries. There just seems to be this feeling that everything is moving towards a more mainstream debate and becoming more politicized. And Cami, there was a story that we picked up in the Defiant, which is about US lawmakers introducing a bill to stop the IRS from taxing crypto transactions. And there was more news on those who are staking as well. Could you pick up some of that?
Yeah, so there's a bill to stop the IRS from taxing crypto transactions under $200. Who knows whether that will pass, but it's this push to make crypto easier to use in the mainstream by avoiding taxation for like small transactions. It would obviously be easier to use crypto as a means of exchange. And that should kind of spur more activity. So I think you're right, Ash, that it's just really hard to pin these market moves on any single news. To be honest, I don't think it was the India CBDC. I don't think it was Russia. I don't think it was this US bill. I think it is just a very volatile asset, and it just it moves with obviously people kind of becoming interested in it, and maybe there's some flows from big funds that just kind of the past couple of weeks decided to finally get into Bitcoin. Maybe it's some other institutional players. Who knows? I think it kind of when we're outside of these kind of big broad market movements that makes Bitcoin and crypto kind of pick up correlation with the broader markets in like the upside or the downside, and we're back to these kind of like more lateral moves, is when we see crypto kind of start to decouple from stocks and from other risk assets, and that's what we're seeing now. It's kind of like dancing to its own rhythm.
Yeah, I think Cami hit it perfectly right there. This is part of a broader theme, though, I would say, about the maturation of the regulatory and legislative process. Look, I would say, though, there are going to be ups and downs in this. We're going to see starts and then false starts and backsliding. But the reality, the recognition that transactions under $200, for example, as Cami points out, whether or not that bill passes, probably are not things that we should be thinking of the way that we think of, for example, stock trades and staking. Obviously, this is something that's been a question that's been floating around for some time now. But the idea that staking may not be taxed in the same way as you would a traditional financial transaction probably makes a lot of sense and can be good for the industry. I think this is part of a broader reconciliation of trying to understand how existing securities, tax laws, and other regulatory domains fit into crypto. Because when you think about it, what's happened is we put this framework on crypto, we meaning Western nations in particular. This framework was imposed from the outside based on things that people already knew. Securities legislation, things, for example, taxing capital gains, these kinds of schemas were imposed where perhaps they don't really fit. We're in this long process now of sorting that out, figuring out what the most appropriate regulations are. And I think it's going to take some time.
Well, the Russian news is interesting because Russia has traditionally come out fairly strongly against
cryptocurrencies. And there was an article I was reading from just 20 days ago where Russia's central bank was proposing banning the use of money of cryptocurrencies on Russian territory. And then today, the latest news is that Russia may well soon become the latest country to recognize cryptocurrency as a form of currency. It'll be heavily regulated, of course, but I mean, this is a massive turnaround for a country that was vehemently against it. And it's like, well, if Russia, then who's next? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, again, I guess it comes back to sort of the framework I was just applying. Extremely early in this space, there are going to be ups, there are going to be downs, there are going to be reversions, there are going to be about faces, and it's going to be a bumpy ride. But I think I'm an optimist. I think we're going to get there. I think what we're seeing now is governments, legislators, and regulators trying to struggle with how to bring this into a framework that fits into the broader social, financial, economic sphere of the nation state. And that's a long process.
Cami, do you remember the Uniswap grant that was given to the committee that was lobbying Congress for better regulation? Do you know what's happened to that one?
What's happened to the grant? No, I don't know the latest on that. Were there kind of further developments?
To be honest with you, I've lost track of it. But the reason I bring it up is because I had a conversation last night with a figure who would be well known if I named him, but I promise not to name him at this point, but extremely prominent in US politics, who is putting together a group to lobby for more sensible regulation. And the point he was making to me last night was Democrats tend to be against crypto, Republicans tend to be for it. It's a partisan issue at the moment. What he was trying to do was say, well, listen, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be bipartisan. It should be for everybody. And if we can remove that piece of the politics from it, what he was telling me as well was that really, at the moment, there's about 24 key decision makers that you have to reach and get on your side. And he said it may seem like Congress is completely stuffed up and constipated and can't do anything, but actually, if you target those people correctly and talk to them with sensible language, things actually could happen. It's not this big black box. It's just some personal relationships, a Rolodex, and then some meaningful conversations, which I thought was kind of encouraging, actually. But Ash, I mean, I know you're not exactly the most optimistic about the congressional process.
Well, I just think it's going to take time. I think it's going to be a long road to get there. And you're right. Unfortunately, this has become a partisan issue. But I will add sort of one silver lining on that gray cloud, which is if you talk to folks who consider themselves progressive, people on the left, if you talk to people under 30, there's a great deal more openness to digital assets, to cryptocurrency, to Bitcoin than you see, for example, with the older demographic. So while I think on the surface, it certainly appears like kind of everything else in the United States and the UK and many Western democracies like a hyper-partisan issue, I think when you look beneath the surface of the demography, there's just a broad sense among younger people, people in their 20s, that this is a technology that they want to be a part of their lives.
Well, one of the really fascinating stories that we covered from last week revolved around the bailout of the Solana wormhole bridge. And if you don't know what a wormhole bridge is, it probably makes no sense at all. But this is a piece of infrastructure that allows value to transfer from Ethereum to one of the biggest layer one chains at the moment, Solana. And someone took $320 million worth of value out of it. But then Jump Trading came in and put it back, which is just remarkable. Cami, what's your take on this one?
Well, I mean, there are different aspects to highlight. Like one is this the risk of this multi-chain world. So what we've seen is there have been a flurry of new layer one blockchains emerge to satisfy the demand for block space. People are wanting to transact and to use decentralized applications. Ethereum has become expensive, so other layer ones like Solana, like Avalanche, and so on have emerged to satisfy that demand. And there are these connectors between blockchains, which allow people to move assets that are native to Ethereum onto blockchains like Solana or other layer ones. And Wormhole is one of these bridges. Vitalik actually made the creator of Ethereum made a point that he thinks that the future will be multi-chain, like there will be many different chains, but he doesn't think it will be cross-chain. So he thinks that there will be many different use cases being built on top of different blockchains, but he doesn't think it will be safe enough to transact across these chains. And he made this post, and a few days later, this hack happened where somebody was able to extract 120,000 worth of ETH, which was $320 million at the time, kind of like proving this point that these cross-chain bridges are very risky. So I think that may kind of put a dent into this vision that we'll have this like multi-chain world with all of this, like all assets interconnecting between blockchains, and people will be able to transact on decentralized applications without even caring what the chains are beneath. Like there's been kind of this consensus that this world is coming, but now maybe kind of after this, you'll have people will start to have second thoughts on whether this is viable or whether this is a risk they want to take. So, I mean, that is one take. The other spin to it is, it's early, of course. Like this is one of the first such bridges. It's still a technology that's in development, and probably things will become safer, and there will be other safeguards like insurance and so on that will make losses like these manageable. But of course, in this case, the insurance came from this trading firm, Jump Crypto, which maybe a day later, it just
Yeah,
came in.
it was 24 hours.
It was 24 hours.
Yeah.
Just came in and replaced the $320 million dollars in ETH back into this bridge. And yeah, it was like a kind of Deus Ex Machina move, which it's like it was a crypto bailout basically.
It was a Deus Flex Machina, really,
Yes.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, like crypto, Jump Crypto has a investment in Solana, in Terra, and like it's invested in a cross-chain universe, and so that's why they tweeted when they made this move. They said it did it because it believes in a multi-chain future, and it didn't want obviously their this bridge that they had backed to fail. So I don't know what went on, behind the scenes. Like I don't know what assurances they were given. I thought they just like, they put in 300 million bucks with no strings attached. So that's kind of remains unknown what happened behind the scenes. But in the end, like the final outcome is that nobody lost money from this hack. So it was like a happy ending, but I think I don't know if that's going to be the case every time. I mean, likely not. So
well, the truth is, most of the money that was lost was actually theirs. so make of that what you will.
right.
Ash, you must have read this story. Does anything jump out at you from this?
Well, it's easy to follow Cami because I usually agree with her, and I agree with everything that she said there. Just to double click on a couple of points that she made that I think are specifically relevant here. First, it is obviously, we keep saying this, we're like a broken record. It's very early, but it's very, very, very early in the cross-chain space. This technology is even less mature than some of the other technologies in which it's really early. And then the second point, this idea of Jump Capital, Jump Capital's crypto division jumping in and doing this. This is a really interesting sort of idea. This idea that venture capitalists sort of step up into the bridge and throw in, $320 million of their own capital to backstop an investment that they have. This is something that's very interesting. It's kind of this sort of gray area between traditional venture capital on the one hand and decentralized finance on the other. I think that's a really interesting aspect of this story.
Oh, it absolutely is. It's where is the power lying? And if you're a regulator in Congress, how do you look at that? How do you say, okay, well, actually, no, you make, but you can't stop them, because if they want to do that, well, they're going to do that. I have some interesting insight into this, because when I was working at Harmony, we were building a bridge, and we had a bridge hackathon over the course of a weekend. 3 different teams within Harmony tried to build a bridge. They're extremely difficult. Firstly, to build a bridge that is permissionless and trustless, those 2 things together at scale are insanely difficult. Nobody really understands how they work. I had to go deep and figure that stuff out. The problem is, when you move value from one place to another, it's like putting a whole bunch of gold bullion in the back of a van and saying, nobody's ever going to hold up the van. It will never happen. But of course it will. What's interesting is that really bridges are a proof of concept, and it's a proof of concept for a technology that we don't even need. And so I'm looking further ahead to something called Layer 0, which is a technology that simply allows you effectively to pick up the phone, call the person at the other end and say, I attest to the fact that these funds exist, and I allow this person to use them on the other side. Nothing ever needs to travel. It's simply a form of communication. And because it works at the very, very, very lowest base layer of the blockchain, it's incredibly lightweight as well. So you can send a message extremely quickly. That is where this is going. And that's where all of this could actually work, because it's basically impossible to hack it as well. So there is hope for this, but the bridges are a disaster. They're horrific, and they will just continue to be attacked because they're so very, very vulnerable. There you go. That's my take on it from the inside out. Talking about being vulnerable, here's what happens if you tweet something and then 5 years later, the army of forensic armchair detectives go down and hunt that tweet. And this is what happened to Brantly Millegan. He got cancelled. Cami, can you take us through this story?
This is such a fascinating story. So, okay, so Brantly Millegan is he was part of the ENS organization. This organization that allows you to attach readable names to blockchain addresses. And in 2016, he had tweeted, where is this tweet? Okay, so he had tweeted, I can't find it, but
I have it.
Okay,
I can
okay,
read it.
you want to read it?
So
Read
it's,
it.
if just warning you, if you're easily offended, then just mute now, because it's
Yeah.
not great. He says homosexual acts are evil. Transgenderism doesn't exist. Abortion is murder. Contraception is a perversion. So is masturbation and porn.
Yeah.
And the date on this one is the 13th of, I think it's May 2016.
Right. Okay, so this tweet surfaced. And obviously, a lot of people were offended and called for him to be removed. And what happened was that he holds the largest amount of ENS tokens were delegated to him to represent token holders in votes. So he was the biggest representative of the ENS community, effectively. After this tweet surfaced, some token holders started removing their votes to him, but he held that position as like the biggest delegate until the kind of this like council decided to remove him, like voted to remove him from ENS, from his role. The private company employing him also fired him. And I think like this sparked a very hard debate, hard in the sense that I think it's hard to have, like, for me at least, like a black and white view on this. On the one hand, Brantly made those comments because of his beliefs, that he is a conservative Catholic. So that's why he said homosexual acts are evil, transgenderism doesn't exist, etc. It kind of follows his religious beliefs. And the other thing is that's why he stood by them. Like, unlike other cases where tweets surface about someone, and then they apologize. They say, "Oh, I was young, I didn't know," or whatever. Like, he stood by his views, um, and I think that's fair. Like, people should be able to have their views. I think even more so if it's because of their religion. Like, I, of course, like, personally 100% disagree with everything he said. Like, I could not kind of ever stand by those views, but he should be able to. I think, like, there's free speech, there's freedom of religion, and he wasn't affecting, he wasn't imposing those beliefs on anyone on ENS, right? He it's not like he was like deplatforming gays from ENS or like anything like that. So I kind of get the view of people who say, it's free speech, it's a free country, and he that shouldn't affect his work. And then there's the other side that says, well, he is representing, he's the biggest representative of ENS token holders. He's at the face of this company and this protocol. This project wants to represent an inclusive community. It doesn't want to hurt anyone or single people out. So it's not sustainable to have a person with views that are so different from the community that he is representing. My personal take is that if that's the case, then I think that they should have let the market play out. If you were offended with Brantly's views and you didn't want him to represent you, then you should have taken your token delegation away from him, and the market would have not like naturally made him step down in representation. Like, he would have naturally become gone from the highest delegate to the one of the delegates with the lowest amount of votes. But instead of that, there was a vote of, like, I think it was like 5 people, but like a very small number of people who voted to remove him. So I don't know.
Yeah, he was canceled. He was canceled, straight up canceled. Yeah.
That makes me. I wish like that. I wish there was like. I wish token holders would have made that decision rather than a just like closed council of people. If people choose to not have Brantly represent them, that's 100% fair and in their right. And some like that was in the process of happening, but there was just like not enough time for that to play out before he was like canceled. So, and the last thing I'll say is, I think what's dangerous about this is it may just set this precedent that, whenever people don't agree with something someone says, as long as there's this kind of big group of people coming against someone, then it's going to be a matter of time before they get removed from their position. And today it happened that, probably everyone here in this call and probably the majority of people disagree with what he said, and it's fine. But what happens when the thing that you stand for is what is being called out? So I don't know. I think, it's a very kind of US centric take as well, this kind of cancel culture. And I think people in the US can be more like maybe not see the gravity of this, because they haven't been in a position of more repressive regimes where being canceled has like extremely dire consequences. So anyways, I would think that this can be just like a very dangerous precedent to set, and it can be a slippery slope.
Ash, what are your thoughts on this one? Because from our side, it looks like a failure of the governance process as we've been kind of holding it up as this thing that we do. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I was thinking about this a little bit more broadly in terms of the technology. What happens when we get to a point where governance is going to be, obviously in this case, there's the capacity of delegates to switch. But what happens when there's a protocol, for example, when someone says something that a large group of people think is highly offensive, and then you have effectively them controlling a large proportion of the governance tokens. They can't be removed or fired as you would from, for example, an employer. This is a conversation that we've been having since probably about 2017 here in the United States. But what happens with version 2.0 of this when someone says something? I just don't know where that shakes out. And it's going to be a really interesting world when we get there to see when effectively you have the properties of math and physics protecting your ownership and governance rights in a particular protocol. What happens next? Or I guess the potential is for forks and splits. This is a really interesting concept, and I think we're going to see it play out, unfortunately, almost certainly in this space.
Well, what you're seeing in our space at the moment is that there's growing awareness that weight in governance matters, and so there are kind of all these governance wars going on at the protocol level where projects attempt to gain an oversized amount of a governance token, for instance, in Curve, to have a massive influence over where the rewards in that protocol go to, but also in saying what happens there. I think the interesting parallel for me this week was Joe Rogan and his podcast, Spotify, and Spotify's actions around that. And it was a really brutal thing that happened. Like, 9 years of podcasts, and every time you said the N word, it's resurfaced. And like we know that, like in podcasts, you say stuff in the heat of the moment, it comes out. And of course, there is an editing process and all of that. But yeah, it was brutal. And so if that podcast was a Web3 podcast and it was owned by a community of governance holders, would they just get rid of him? And where does the debate lie? That, and I think what's hard here is, where is the room for someone to put their hand up and say sorry? In Brantly's case, he didn't. He didn't walk it back at all. But we tend to overreact and have a knee-jerk reaction to things, and then kind of allow outrage to decide where we put our vote, and it just becomes this echo chamber of ideas and thoughts, and it would just be so counterproductive to everything that we're actually trying to do if we allowed that to become the normal. So I think it's
this. What are the consequences of people constantly being recorded on video and audio all of the time? I don't know about you guys, but I certainly am pleased, relieved that there isn't a lot of video out there from when I was, 14, 15, 16 years old. You have kids who are growing up today in this environment where it's just completely saturated with permanent records of these things that they're saying. And this idea that someone's going to go for a job interview at 25 or 30 and someone's going to drag out something that they said when they were 15 or 16 years old and here's the video, man, that's going to be an uncomfortable conversation to have.
Well, we're also looking at these brand new social network concepts that are coming out on the blockchain, which is like your comments get turned into NFTs and they get committed to the blockchain, and then they are there and they're attached forever to your profile. Now, there's two ways to look at this. One of which is you're screwed and you self-censor to avoid any kind of backlash on things that are that you've said or might have said. That might actually be a good thing. Or you say, well, actually, the threat of that will force people to be a little bit nicer. I don't know where it lands, but I know that there's definitely yeah. I've got kids. I'm going to teach them how to use the internet properly, and that means that they won't ever use it probably. It's horrifying, but we're in the middle of this, and we have to figure it out because who else is going to figure it out? I'll tell you what, though, if we're talking bad actors, what a beautiful way to end the show. The Bitfinex hack, $3.6 billion in Bitcoin that the US government was trumpeting loudly that they had recovered. What a story this was. Cami, can you walk us through it?
Yeah, okay. So Bitfinex was hacked in 2016 for about 120,000 Bitcoin, which at the time was worth about $71 million. Of course, since then, Bitcoin has skyrocketed, and that stash is now worth 3.6 billion. So what happened this week was that a couple that had their hands on this Bitcoin, it's not clear whether they were the actual hackers, but they had this Bitcoin on their hands, and they were in the process of laundering it, and they were caught. in that process. And I think like a couple of things to say. One, you guys should take a look at the woman behind this, because she's just something. She's a rapper.
Explain.
She just like has this really kind of flamboyant and goofy character, like persona online. And yeah, she's just this like rapper artist. I don't know. It's just like very. It's not like the type of person that you would expect would be laundering 120,000 worth of Bitcoin. I'll say that. So that was just like a funny kind of side note of this whole story. And then I guess like the other takeaway is it just like puts another dent to that argument that Bitcoin is for criminals. Right now, the FBI and lawmakers and regulators they have become really, really sophisticated in tracking down illegal activity, and actually, as always, cash is the safest way for criminals to transact. Having a permanent record on chain, both for social media and for illegal transfers, is not kind of the easiest way to go. And this case proves it. Like, this guy's, imagine just like holding on to billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin for years, and waiting to finally kind of use it, and then being caught like the minute they start moving their funds. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you put it correctly. This is Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan. Heather Morgan hilariously wrote for Forbes, and the title of one of her articles was "Experts Share Tips to Protect Your Businesses from Cyber Criminals." And this is Heather R. Morgan, economist, serial entrepreneur, SaaS investor, and rapper. And then when we look at her rapping, oh my good God. If you were going to write a show about all the idiots in blockchain, this is what it would look like. You would just parody everything that's bad about this space, and it would look like that. And here we are, it's real. You couldn't make this up. What I want to know is how on earth they could afford to buy these Bitcoins in the first place. Where did that come from? And then just like, the best part of all of this is Michael Saylor coming out and tweeting, the US has billions in Bitcoin on its balance sheet. Those files contain the private keys required to access the digital wallet that directly received the funds stolen from Bitfinex and allowed special agents to lawfully seize and recover more than 94,000 Bitcoin that had been stolen from Bitfinex. You just imagine Michael going, hey, boys, welcome to the club. How's it feel? Ash,
Well,
what do you make of it?
Well, to echo Cami's point, I think it's incredibly important to note precisely what she said about this idea that Bitcoin is for criminals. Clearly, cash, euro, other paper currencies, banknotes, much better for facilitating transactions that are illicit. You can see clearly U.S. law enforcement, federal law enforcement, very sophisticated in how they're tracking these crimes. Two additional points. I know it's easy to get caught up in the raps and the rhymes here, but important to say, of course, innocent until proven guilty. They've been charged but not convicted of any crime. And second, to me, reading the criminal complaint, well, the thing that jumped out at me, and Cami touched on this, which is this idea that they were not charged with actually committing the theft. They were charged with conspiracy to launder the illicit proceeds of the theft. To me, this story is something that we're going to have to continue to watch. I suspect that there are more shoes to drop here. I think this is very early on in the story, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes next.
Well, the one that jumps out is, of course, Quadriga. The Quadriga went bust, its Canadian crypto exchange, and with it, a ton of Bitcoin has just disappeared. Nobody knows where it is, and will we see it just turn up somewhere on the black market in 3 or 4 years' time? I mean, the truth.
The second largest hack of Bitcoin in history, 120,000 coins. I think Mt. Gox was about 140,000. This predates Mt. Gox by about 3 years. This was 2016. Mt. Gox was 2019. But it's a huge amount of coins. The total amount of value outstanding on this hack, I believe, is over $5 billion now, of which 3.6 billion were recovered by federal law enforcement, which we found out about yesterday, Robin.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It was one of my favorite stories of the last week. Cami, is there anything you're looking forward to in the week ahead as we wrap this up?
I think like going back to the beginning, the price action has been super surprising. I think we were all kind of getting ready to go hibernate in a long bear market, and suddenly everything's awake again, and maybe the bulls are back. So I'll be watching and seeing kind of where we go. Should I go back into the cave, or should I put on the horns?
One never goes into the cave. One always stays out in the open where one can be attacked relentlessly. Ash, I know you watch the markets. Is there anything you're looking out for specifically?
So I, as always, am going to be watching price action. I'm also going to be continuing to watch the story we were just talking about. Let me just throw one more out there that I found amusing, which was the Decentraland wedding. This is kind of a funny, silly story, but it's also a glimpse into the future. This couple got married in Decentraland. Apparently, it was a comedy of errors. There were server problems. The NFT party favors ran out. I'm going to quote F. Scott Fitzgerald: "The test of a truly first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind without losing the ability to function." On the one hand, boy, this seems like it's really silly. On the other hand, I suspect that we're going to be seeing a lot more of this type of activity, whether it's weddings, funerals, this idea that our lives are moving into the metaverse. It's something that's going to happen, and it's something that's going to be an interesting and I think really compelling place to watch, Robin.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my investigations this week went into a project called Lens Protocol, which is from Aave, one of the kind of major blue chip DeFi protocols, and they released a version of Facebook's social graph, but a decentralized version of it. So rather than trying to upend Facebook and Twitter and everything else, what they've said is we're going to decentralize this social graph upon which all of these services are built and allow you to build your service on top of that. That's the first time I've seen that idea being put together. And for me, that and the mycelial network that it creates, that is the bedrock of what will be the metaverse in its fleshed out, beautiful form. I think we just become so used to seeing video games and high production value CGI in movies that we forget that underneath it you actually need to have the script, the story, the thing that makes it all possible. And that is what Lens Protocol, I think, could be the beginnings of. But I'm going to hold judgment on that till I see an actual app on it. But that's going to come soon, and maybe we'll all be using that instead of Twitter, which would be interesting. And of course, Social Truth, Trump's social network is about to launch, or may launch, or may not launch. Who knows if the App Store bans it. But a show that won't be banned for next week is this one. So join us next week for more of the same. From myself, Cami, Ash, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week at the same time.
Thank you.
Goodbye.